So I'm gonna actually, I actually prepared I thought I had 15 or 16 minutes, but I only have 12, so I'm gonna have to cut a few minutes out. But luckily, part of what I'm going to say, Wandy has already said, and some of these points have already been made, especially in the first part of the first session today on just the importance of people being different. I'll just, I'll say a little bit who I am. I'm Greg Samanez-Larkin. I'm primarily a psychologist, but a lot of people call the research that I do neurofinance or experimental or behavioral finance. So we're, I think, one of the only labs in the world, embarrassingly, for our field that studies financial decision-making and aging. So we look at how people save and spend throughout adulthood, and we're specifically interested in how people spend or manage finances after age 60. We do that both behaviorally with experimental things in the lab, where we have little sort of real markets and things like that. But we also do a lot of brain imaging, so we look directly at the brain and look at brain structure and function. And so we try to integrate all of these fields together to study this hugely important topic, which you all realize. So what I'm going to do, my plan in the next 10 minutes or something, is to tell you, I think, a few things that we've learned from research over the last 10, 20 years that I think people still don't really get or really know. So I'm going to say what we thought we knew or what some people think we still know. So this is kind of related to stereotypes, and what we actually know. So I'm going to talk a bit about emotion, risk aversion, fraud susceptibility. One warning, risk preference and risk taking is massively complicated. And that's one thing we've learned, and probably you all already know that anyway, but I'm going to maybe complicate things a little bit, and that's just reality. So I'm going to talk about just one study, and just in one or two slides very briefly is just a recent finding from the lab, just kind of as an example of what we do related to financial risk-taking and aging. And then I'm going to end, if I have enough time, with what I think we should do about it. But again, I'm an academic, so I have limited ability to translate this stuff, although I think I'm getting better. So the first point, which Wandy already made, is that people thought that getting old sucks, basically, that getting old is depressing, older people are all sad and not motivated and all this stuff. And a lot of research has shown that this is just not true at all. So actually, emotional well-being improves with age. People experience more positive, less negative emotion in daily life. And get better at regulating emotions, all of these things. There's an upside to this, and this just means that you have higher well-being as you get older. My college students actually love hearing this. So I'm at Yale. I teach only undergrads right now, and I always tell them, right now is the worst time ever in your life. You'll never be this negative ever again. And they appreciate that, I think. There's a downside, though, and that's if we really pay excessive attention to positive information, we're sort of always looking away from the downside of things, or potential downside, we're potentially putting ourselves at risk to make mistakes. And so we've done a couple of studies on this, funded through the FINRA Investor Education Foundation, in part in collaboration with Brian Knutson at Stanford, specifically on the concept of financial fraud, but just we study aging and financial risk-taking in general in the context of that. So I think that's the first point, which has already been made. The second one is that we thought we knew, or we think we still know, that risk aversion increases with age. It does kind of in some ways. So what the data tell us from experimental research is that some people say they're risk averse, but they don't always behave that way. And they might not even hardly ever behave that way. So there's this real disconnect between what people think about themselves and what they actually do. I'm just going to point out, so I'm going to limit the information here to simplify for everyone. So this is just an example, and this is actually a longitudinal, so I'm glad that Keith brought this up, that a lot of data is cross-sectional, there's big cohort effects and all these things. This is actually a study that we recently did with 10,000 citizens in Germany, and it was over 10 years. We looked at their self-reported, so this is what people say about their risk tolerance, so how likely are you to take a risk in general, and this is what happens with age. The blue lines are, you guessed it, males, and the red line are females, so there's this sex difference. But overall, in general, this is kind of what we thought was true. People say they take less risk as they get older. If we looked across a bunch of domains, and the effect is not the same across domains. I'm not going to have time to get into that. But the financial one's pretty interesting. Things are fairly stable until pre-retirement. Then people say they're starting to get a little more risk averse. This is just what people say. What do? They do all kinds of things. So this is a meta-analysis of behavioral research, so laboratory-based research where people are playing investment games or little gambling tasks and things like that. Some of it's hypothetical, some of it's for real money. Even when it's for real money, it's for $25. Who knows if this is what you do with $700,000 of savings. We're working on trying to put those pieces together, see if this stuff generalizes or not. But basically all I want to say is that a positive number here would mean that the study found, so each square here is the result of a study, and it's the age difference. So this would be older adults take more risks. On the other side is older adults take less risks. And you can find a data point pretty much anywhere. And so it depends on the kind of task people are doing. We tried to understand what was going on here. And one thing we got out of this was that, well, maybe it looks like older adults kind of are excessively risk-seeking or even sometimes excessively risk-averse just when it's complicated. So even when the situation's, the decision to be made is complicated, it doesn't mean that we're going to be biased in one particular direction or another. So the behavior of clients is kind of unpredictable, which is sort of unfortunate. But we're trying to get a better understanding of in which context, in which type of decisions, are we likely to see more risk-seeking or more risk aversion in older age. So this is actively, everything I'm talking about, we're actively working on. So what's going on here? Are people even aware that there's an inconsistency with their preferences? I don't know. We've never asked people this, actually. We have a lot of studies where we ask for people to report how much they prefer risk, and then we measure how much they prefer risk in a task. And we never then tell people, well, you said you wanted this, but you did this other thing. Like, why did you do that? So we need to do that research, I think. Maybe Wandy knows about some findings out there that I don't know. I think there's also an issue of risk perception. So sometimes things that are very risky are not perceived as risky. So you might say, I don't like risk. And then you do all this risky stuff. And then if I ask you about it, you'd say, well, it didn't seem risky. Right? So there could be an issue, that you just don't realize that you're making a risky decision. So as I said, I think some of this we thought has to do with cognitive ability or limitations in information processing. But it also could be related to specific features of the decision options. And so I'll talk about one example today, which is skew. So, but I think the bottom line of this is that we can't assume risk aversion in decision behavior in older age. We can't just assume that people will become more risk averse as they get older and be very cautious and careful all the time. The next one is, and this is still, I think a lot of people think this is true, and there is some truth to this again, but older people are more susceptible to fraud. Older people are suckers. This is what con artists think. This is why they over-target older people. And I think what we've come to know is that some older people are more susceptible to fraud. By the way, people are susceptible to fraud at any age, but there are important individual differences. So if you haven't seen this paper and you're interested in this topic, I strongly encourage you to look at this. The title is Contrary to Psychological and Popular Opinion, there's no compelling evidence that older adults are disproportionately victimized by consumer fraud. That doesn't mean this isn't a really important topic that we shouldn't be investing a lot of resources in, because mistakes in older age are way worse than mistakes in your 20s, arguably, right? So throwing away $900,000 is a much bigger mistake than racking up $4,000 of credit card debt when you're in college. So this is a really important topic for us to be focusing resources on. But we shouldn't be thinking of it as, oh, we need to help these poor older people who don't know what in the world they're doing. So I think we need to be realistic about this. I liked Brett's point earlier that age isn't explaining a lot of variance in a lot of this stuff, right? There are these huge individual differences. And so this makes things complicated, but basically means we need to figure out who are the people that need our help the most. And this isn't easy. But we can't assume older means more susceptible, but there are certain risk factors that increase with age that might make a subset of people more susceptible. So one thing we've studied recently is skewed risks. Actually, easier way to go through this is just to show you some examples. So Keith had this example of these symmetric gambles where it was like a coin flip, basically. There's a 50-50 chance. So these are just sample ones that people encountered in this game that they play in our lab. And by the way, this is all for real cash, even though it's small stakes. So 50% chance you could win $3.05, 50% chance you could lose $3.05. Just a coin toss, essentially. We look at how people at different ages are more or less likely to accept or reject that kind of a gamble. There are positively skewed and negatively skewed risks. So a positive skew means there's a small chance of a big win, but most likely a small loss. This is kind of like winning the lottery, or actually kind of like, can people not hear me? Can you guys hear me? Am I projecting okay? Oh, thank you. So this is like winning the lottery. This is also like fraud. Like, oh, you have this rare opportunity. You could have this huge payout. So these things are often framed as in terms of being positively skewed. Also, negative skew is like a small chance of a pretty big loss, but mostly you'll just have a small gain. And this is kind of like an example would be like contracting a rare illness or like getting in a plane crash or something like that. There's like, it's a horrible outcome if it happens, but low probability, so that'd be negative skew. And so we looked at preferences for all these kinds of things across adulthood. This is a very small sample in this particular study, so you're probably like 34 people. What can you say with 34 people? And by the way, these 34 people are extremely healthy. So in my lab, we only study normal aging, which has been brought up earlier. We don't study mild cognitive impairment or dementia. But probably some of our people will go on to develop one of these diseases, and maybe they're even in very early stages. We don't know that yet. But for the most part, they're extremely healthy. These people play this task while they're getting their brain scanned. So we do this with most studies in our lab, have people play these financial games while they're sitting laying on a table like that with their head in a machine, and we're looking at functional brain activity while they do this. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the brain imaging stuff. I'll just show you a little bit of a teaser of something we get from brain imaging that we don't get from behavior. Doesn't mean you should all invest in brain scanners. Yeah, and then also in this study, we have this financial survey, which asks a lot of questions about asset allocation and financial experience, financial knowledge, 4 or 5 different measures of risk or risk preference, and then also some fraud-related questions. I think I said this study was funded by Finner Foundation, but I just want to thank them again. So let's just first look at the behavior. I know probably many of you aren't used to looking at data like this, but I want to, how am I doing on time?
5 minutes.
Okay, I should be able to handle that. Okay, so this is age along the x-axis, and y-axis is the acceptance rate for each of these different types of gambles. And the first finding is basically that people are more likely to accept a positively skewed gamble, and that this effect increases with age. So this means you go ahead, you take the risk. The alternative is always you don't take the risk, you just get 0, a guaranteed chance of 0, essentially. And so older adults are more likely to take these positively skewed risks on average. I'll come back to the importance of that. Less likely to take the negatively skewed ones, but that's pretty similar actually to the symmetric ones, so the coin toss. And in general, people don't like the negatively skewed stuff, so they're more likely to reject than accept the negatively skewed ones, but that tendency increases with age. One thing I want you to notice is that so each person here has 3 data points, because there are 3 different kinds of decisions you could make, so that's why it looks like there's a little bit more data than there actually is. But one thing I really want you to notice is that even within any age here, there's tremendous variability. So even though we see these trends overall, it looks like older adults are more attracted to positive skew, they don't want negative skew, there are people that totally violate these age trends. And I think this is probably fairly representative data. I think if we got 10,000 more subjects on this, it would sort of still be distributed in this way. That's sort of my best guess. But I just think this is really important, that there are really big individual differences here. So I think I made this point already, that people don't like negative skew. Older adults don't like it even more than younger people. But yeah, and strong individual differences. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want to get to the end part, which I think is more interesting for everyone here. Basically, we look at activity in different parts of the brain that actually we've shown in lots of studies predicts people being more likely to take a risk or more likely to avoid a risk. And essentially we replicate some previous findings, but also show that these effects are slightly weaker in older adults. I'm not going to get into the details right now, unfortunately. We did find one relationship between a brain measure, but not a behavioral measure, and likelihood of fraud. So this is from this fraud survey that we have and this is self-reported, so it's not objective data, unfortunately. But it is true that people that have more activation in this part of the brain that usually predicts risk aversion are less likely to become victims of fraud. And we didn't get this from our behavioral measures. So this is sort of unique to the brain imaging measure. So we do get some interesting, unique stuff from the brain imaging, other than just I'm interested in how the brain works, and that's partly why we do this research. But we hope that it's useful in predicting decision-making in everyday life. So what do we do about this? Before I run out of time and get pushed off here, I just want to say that I'm not going to be around for the rest of the conference. So I have to leave basically in the middle of lunch. But please reach out to me. So I'm hugely interested in connecting with the private sector because I feel sort of like, I liked this comment earlier, like it was emphasizing that you all kind of have maybe a moral responsibility to help people here, and you're uniquely positioned to do this. And then to echo Wandy's point, that's what we're here for too. So you should lean on us. Like, I don't want to offer Wandy up as a consultant or something, but really, I will, so give me a call anytime, email me anytime. I would love to talk to you about this and try to help you out with some of these issues because I think it's really important and I think we can do good work together. So the big thing I want to emphasize here at the end is that we shouldn't make assumptions. We definitely shouldn't make assumptions based on age. Old people aren't just suckers. Old people aren't just terrible at making financial decisions. I made this point earlier that actually lots of people are doing just fine, and they're doing just fine for a lot of their life. Doesn't mean that there aren't people that are hugely at risk, but I think we shouldn't make assumptions like we have been making. It means that we have to realize that the world is vastly more complicated than we wish it was, but that's reality. We need to develop better risk assessments. So I just showed you that even within the same kind of a task, there's some types of decisions where older adults are more likely to take the gamble, and some types of decisions where they're less likely to take the gamble. So even in the context of one individual little game over the span of 15 minutes, you get behavior that sort of seems to contradict. This is a huge challenge. So I don't think it's a good, I think like the industry standard is you ask somebody one question or maybe 5 questions like how much risk do you want? Or how much risk can you tolerate? I don't know that that's the best measure. I think people probably agree that that's probably not the best measure. But I don't have a good suggestion for you at this moment of what to replace that with. So I think this is like a working problem that we all need to collaborate on. And then coming back to this individual differences point, we need to develop products because I think a lot of the people in this room are in the business of developing products that work well on average for people, but are adaptable for individuals. So there will be very older adults who are doing just fine, thank you very much, but others that need a lot of help. And so I think we can work together to develop some things on that. I just want to clarify a little bit. So Wandy kind of made this point, but psychologists don't just do mental health. Maybe a lot of you know this already. But actually, I'm not even trained to do anything related to mental health. My wife's a clinical psychologist. But what we've been trained to do is study information processing. This is exactly what a lot of you are interested in, right? Like, how can we get people to process information better? This is what we're experts on doing. So anyway, I hope you'll call on us to help you out. All right, thanks.